Hey everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be discussing an important question. And let me give you a quick background about why this came up. So one of the students that I work with came to me one day and asked, should I be applying for the Big Four or not? And I genuinely didn't have an answer because I've never worked for the Big Four. I was offered the job once, but for some reason I didn't, go for it. And this is why I literally called a friend for help, who's with us today. And I'm going to have him introduce himself in a moment. But that's basically what we're going to be talking about. You, as a cybersecurity fresh graduate, you are considering your career options. Would you or would you not want to go for one of the big four companies? With that said, let me start with a quick round of introduction. We'll start with the ladies first. So with me as well today is, I don't think she needs an introduction, but we will have her introduce herself anyway. Rana, if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rana Khalil. I'm an application security engineer team lead working for a small consulting company here in Ottawa, Canada.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you for joining us. So Rana is going to be sort of on my side of the table, launching a million questions on the other side of the table where we have my very good friend, Maher. Maher, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Maher, and I'm many titles, but a security professional and a security researcher for many years. And I worked in the government. I moved on to consulting with the Big Four, and I moved back to vendors doing security research.
Amazing. So, Maher, the reason I reached out to you is because I know that you worked for the Big Four for a number of years. At one point in time, you even were managing a fairly big team here in the region. By the way, a quick disclaimer, whatever we're discussing here, I would like to assume that it does apply to Big Four internationally. There might be a few bits and pieces that are applicable here locally to the region where we're at, GCC, Dubai, Emirates, etc. But nonetheless, I do think that a lot of what we're going to be discussing is going to be applicable internationally. So before we dive in, let's start, Maher, if you don't mind, just defining to us what are the Big Four, like, and why would a lot of students be interested in working for the Big Four? Particularly here, we're talking, of course, about the cybersecurity graduates or fresh graduates.
Sure. I mean, the Big Four essentially are the Big Four companies that do auditing at large. And now auditing, it started with financial auditing, but then it became more than financial auditing. It became consulting, it became external and internal audit, financial audit, forensics, and cybersecurity. Cybersecurity was part of the enterprise risk services, and then it became risk advisory, or different names in the same context. So really, they are the big major known audit firms, and they had a broad variety of services. Now, why would people usually go there and work is the exposure, the nice, and the branding. The branding itself is an attractive thing, but also the exposure that they give into working with different clients, different industries, and different kinds of projects, different types of projects even, which you don't get easily when you work for other types of companies. With that said, each type of company has its own exposure, its own types of projects. So audit firms has their own flavor of these kind of things. Why would a fresh graduate would be wanting to work with them? I mean, it's pretty much what I covered, but here comes the thing. Even though they give you the exposure, but it's not necessarily that they give you the real life full expertise or full experience of what you would expect to have in a normal company. So, for example, if you are freshly graduating, knowing the basics from what you get, you wouldn't necessarily apply them in real life. And if you take that immediately to a Big Four with the high exposure into clients and projects, you may find yourself lacking. They would help you out. The team will support you. But at the end of the day, you will be lacking in terms of experience and knowledge. So What I suggest always is you don't get into the audit firms or even international companies in the first place from fresh graduates immediately into that kind of exposure. I would always recommend fresh graduates to start slow, understand the environment, understand what to expect, the different types of roles out there in cybersecurity, and then decide what you want to do. Really build your capacity, your capabilities, your skills in that area. You don't need to get into the advanced level, and then you move on into the audit firms, international names, because then you will get the exposure that helps you grow your skills. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. So if I want to rephrase this the way I understood it, am I correct in understanding that if as a fresh graduate I go and work for the Big Four, yes, there is some really nice exposure. Yes, I am working for a big brand, so to speak, and whatnot. But the downside of it is that maybe I'm not going to become specialized in one field or another. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit more of a generalist. Is that what you're... Is my understanding correct? Yeah.
Yep. That is right.
Okay. I mean, that's a really interesting point, and this is a point of controversy, to be honest, in cybersecurity. So you have a lot of people who would say start as a journalist, then specialize a little bit later. Some people advocate the idea of no, pick something that you want to specialize with straight away. I'm not 100% behind this thought process of picking a specialty very early on, particularly if you're a fresh graduate, because that does require a lot of investment in terms of time and money and training. So I do tend to like the idea of start with generalizing a little bit and then pick your niche a little bit later. But then what I worry about, so what this kind of a little bit contradicts with what you're saying, right? Because if I'm advocating the idea of generalize a little bit better, or generalizing is a bit better, that means I am advocating to the idea of starting with the Big Four. But then what I do worry about is what I see.
Not at all. I'll explain on that.
Okay. So what I was saying is what I worry about is a little bit later down the line throughout your career is what I see with my senior friends is what I call the Big Four revolving door. And this is where my senior friends, I see them jumping from one Big Four to another, from one Big Four to another. And it feels like they are, I don't want to call it stuck, but it's like this is their life now. So they start with one, move on to the other, move on to the third, move on to the fourth, and then they just keep rotating. And that's not necessarily good or bad, but it just becomes sort of like a way of life, basically, for them.
Yeah. I mean, it's so... I would expect a fresh graduate. Now, it depends on the fresh graduate itself, himself or herself. If she knows, like, I don't know, networking and systems and the basics of cybersecurity, that's good. Otherwise, he or she will need to build that capacity, that skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you grow these slowly in a small environment. Now, with limited exposure, and then you start gradually growing in that field of cyber, and then you will see where you fit in to specialize, or you keep generalize. But effectively, even Big Four or big international firms do want both types of people, the generalists and the specialists. Now, which one of them you choose, it depends on you, really. But you always need to understand that you build your capacity first, make yourself a generalist, and then you understand the field of cybersecurity, what are the different roles, what are the different skills needed for each role, and so on, and then you specialize. So I am also in sync with your thoughts, that you start small, generalize, understand the field, the environment, the skills, the roles, and then move on into specialization if you choose to.
That does sort of brings up some old feelings that I had when I started, like, or when I was switching certain careers. And I do tend to agree with you on why would it be a little bit better to start with a smaller company, because I worked with smaller companies, boutique companies when I first started, and then I moved to a $4 billion company a little bit later in my career. And what I noticed is when you are in a smaller boutique company, you have a little bit more attention from your seniors and your superiors, and they will help build you up. But when you move into these massive conglomerates or enterprises or whatever, you are sort of lost in the crowd, and you have to be able to fend yourself or rely on yourself or to pick yourself up. So if you don't have the basic foundations that you've spent the past 2, 3, 5 years sort of building up, you're gonna go and sort of get lost in translation a little bit later.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
that's sorry, Rana, go ahead.
Oh, I'll just chime in as well, because I work both in consulting and in like a government environment. So government is huge over here. I wouldn't call it a small company, but it is very slow paced. So it's not like as fast paced as consulting. And honestly, if someone had told me to get into consulting from the beginning, I would have said that it wasn't a good idea, because like Maher said, it took time to develop those fundamentals when I was working in government, and I had the time and the resources to do that. Whereas when it came to consulting, we have multiple clients. We're working the whole time. I had the time to do my OSCP certification when I was working in government, but when it came to consulting, it's a matter of like billing as many clients as you can and working for as many clients as you can. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult to invest in yourself and in your profession. And if you don't have the fundamentals, you could easily fall behind when it comes to your work.
That's a good point, actually. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do notice that a lot of people that I know that work for the Big Four, they have really good business acumen. So it's not just the technical skills. You're not just a pure pen tester who's going to be behind a screen hacking away for 18 hours a day, but they are presentable. They know how to translate tech to business, business to tech, and so on. Which I think brings me now to my next question. So I know, Maher, that you've hired quite a few people, and when you were working for the Big Four, you had a fairly big team. You've interviewed tens, maybe hundreds of different juniors, seniors, different level. What did you or the Big Four usually look for, aside from the technical capabilities and the technical skills, obviously? What else were you looking for?
Let me start by asking this question. What does a consultant mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm getting a person, fresh graduate, and I'm putting him as a consultant to be consulted by a client who paid a lot of money to be consulted with, to be consulting with a person who is knowledgeable. So I'm effectively consulting a person who's more experienced than me. That's a technical word of consulting, of a consultant in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to have that person, he or she has to have really good skills and experience and exposure to be consulted with in the first place. So he needs, or she needs to have the skills, the technical skills, but also the passion, and he or she also needs to have the business etiquette. Right now, we did a lot of tests for people. I did even have my own informal and casual meetups with the candidates, just to understand them more, if they fit into the culture and so on. But really, it's not about the technical skills only. At the end of the day, you will be presenting your work in some sort or fashion, in a report, in a presentation, in a phone call, or in a Zoom call, whatever. But you need to have the business etiquette, the business logic behind it. We need to understand that cybersecurity is a very small portion if you look at it from a bigger, a big picture perspective. So you'll see, like, it's the entire company that has different departments, and we need to have a small component that secures all these things. Now, we came across different mindsets in this field, and people think like cybersecurity and pen testing, they are doing crazy stuff, big stuff, hacking into other systems so they can patch them. But hey, it's a limited thing inside the big picture. So we need to have people aligned with this mindset that we need to secure in a specific manner for a very specific task because it affects the business at large. We are securing the business at large, not pen testing a small device that doesn't have any relevance. So we really look at the technical skills, business skills, or business etiquette, psychometric. We do psychometric tests just to ensure that the person is patient enough, that can handle stress, right? So because the work-life balance at some point will be interesting, and you'll need to manage that load of work and that load of stress. So yeah, we don't look only
That's something that I do
stuff.
want to ask you, or I believe Rana had a question about this. But before we get into that, I also would love to hear from Rana her thoughts on, what's her definition of a consultant? Because I know, Rana, you're a consultant at the moment, and you're on a different part of the world. So I don't know, maybe you have a different kind of understanding or a different perspective. And is what you're doing now, do you see that fits with what Maher is explaining, or sort of particularly from a Big Four perspective?
So I think Maher nailed it in terms of a definition of a consultant. It's someone that is very well versed and experienced in their field, that you're asking for their help, someone that is much more experienced and is kind of more of like subject matter expert in their field. Of course, that doesn't mean that this is what every consultant is, but to me, that's what they should be. And so I completely agree. Personally, for me, I work for a small consulting company, not for one of the Big Four. And so I get to define which contracts I take. I get to define how much work I do. I get to define all these items. And so it really, for you, when you're working as your own business owner, it's up to you to define all these items. Whereas in Big Four, it's not really up to you because you're working for a big company. Of course, for me, I'm very passionate about this field, and I'm still about 5 to 6 years into this field, and I want to learn as much as possible, and I want to gain as much experience as possible. And so my schedule is completely insane when it comes to consulting. I would imagine it would fit with what the Big Four schedule is, but again, when you're working on your own consulting over here in Canada, it's a little bit different. You do get to decide on which contracts you take and how much work, how many hours that you actually do.
Got you. So basically, you are in full control of
Yes.
what is it that you do, how do you manage your time and whatnot. And so when we were offline or off the record a little bit earlier, Maher mentioned an interesting point that I haven't heard quite a lot actually before, which is some of the skills, obviously, time management, stress management, and whatnot that are required. But one that caught my attention was managing your manager. So in Rana's case, she's her own manager, I believe. But in your case, Maher, so when you mentioned that somebody who is hired into the Big Four needs to have the skill or the capability of managing their manager, that to me was really interesting to hear. Do you want to explain this a little bit?
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, the expectation is a manager would manage a certain amount of employees for a project, right? But at the end of the day, you also want to look at it from the opposite side as well. The employee himself or the consultant himself want to manage his managers, wants or needs to manage their expectations, needs to manage their urgency. Pretty much when you work with Big Four and such consulting firms, you work with pretty much a lot of managers at the same time. And you'll end up with multiple types of urgencies from different types of people and different types of projects. So you want to manage that expectation, so at least you keep it easygoing, if I want to say, for you and for them and for the projects. So yeah, that's what I mean with managing the managers as well from a consultant perspective, managing their expectations and their work life and their workload.
Got you. Speaking about the workload, I think Rana also had a couple of questions on this particular topic in terms of workload balance or something. What did you have in mind, Rana?
Yeah, so I heard that when you're working for the Big Four, even here in Canada, you work 10 to 12 hours a day. So I was wondering if that's the same for the Middle Eastern region, and how you would manage a work-life balance when you're working for one of the Big Four.
Yeah, I mean, the official working hours for everyone pretty much, it's 9 hours. That includes 1 hour lunch. But effectively, you will find yourself, you cannot fit everything you work on within those 8 hours effectively. So you pretty much, if you get more efficient, if you manage the workload somehow, you may be lucky with 12 hours. But
Maybe lucky with
as a
12
minimum?
as a minimum,
Okay.
because sometimes, now again, it depends on the workload. There are seasons, and if you just manage and try to understand things and maybe make yourself efficient, still you are working from your side. But if you just look at the big picture, it's not only your side, but it's the project side, right? So even if you get more efficient in one project, you will see that other projects are keep pushing, or keep pouring in from, I don't know from where. So it's tricky. It's there isn't a silver bullet to this, and you just need to figure it out in due course. Again, everyone ideally would want to leave in 9 hours and just do something else after hours, but that's the ideal situation. It doesn't happen.
Does it get
Uh,
easier though? Like as you become more senior, does it get
I'm
easier or
afraid
does it
not.
become no?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid
Okay.
not. Because your team will grow in time,
Yeah.
and your responsibilities will grow in time. And when you get more senior, you just have to travel more. You just have to review stuff more. Things change, obviously, responsibilities change. The level of delegations may maybe increase or decrease at some point, but still, I don't think that maybe different types of tasks will go away. Other tasks will just increase in time, but at the end of the day, there are still workload. You'll still need to meet people and travel. And
I was just going to ask, is that just in the busy seasons, or is that just in general throughout the whole year? You'd be expected minimum of 12 hours a day.
I mean, it's you would expect this generally speaking, but more
Okay.
specifically during the high season.
So if I'm being very honest, I used to sort of feel like, I wish I went through the Big Four phase and experienced it a little bit. But now, after this conversation, I'm kind of happy I didn't. I think, if I'm being completely honest, that's not to say this is good or bad. Um, from what I understood from you is
But
that, there's a lot of exposure. Sorry, go on.
yeah, there's a lot of exposure, but I wanted to say that it's for the good or the bad. It's not for everyone, really, to be honest. Some people just cannot handle stress. Some people are okay with exposure. They can manage the stress somehow. Each person has his own way. But unfortunately, it's not for everyone. So I've seen people just leave from the first month,
Wow.
third
Okay.
months. Some people, like partners, are staying for like 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. Not everyone is equal.
I think, if you get in at the right time in your career and you're okay with the workload and whatnot, you might manage. You can be okay. So the way I'm thinking about it right now is at the beginning of your career, usually these are the first 4, 5, 6 years where you really should be putting 100%. And
Yep.
going all out, or at least this is how I did it. Some people might disagree, but this is how I did it, because this is where you're building yourself up, and this is where I think it is a little bit okay to work a little bit extra time, maybe a couple weekends, etc., with the right compensation, obviously, and whatnot. But at that point in time, when I started my career, I was single, didn't have family, didn't have kids, etc. So it was okay for me to do this. Now, at this point in time, where I have a family, I have kids to care for and whatnot, there's no way I will allow myself to work for 12 hours a day. There are other things that take priority over this. Does that
Absolutely.
mean I will never ever do it? No. Sometimes, like you're saying, it's a busy season. There's a project that maybe got derailed, messed up a little bit. So you can get into it. But so what I think is that it really depends on the individual. If they are willing to put the time and investment, yes, there's a lot of exposure. Yes, it is a very good name to have on your CV, but there are also the downsides of knowing how to manage stress, which, if I'm being completely honest with you, when I started my career, I didn't know how to manage stress. I was new to all of this, right? So if you want to put yourself in a high stress situation and get all this exposure and experience, but you don't know how to manage stress, I guess this is what's going to happen, where people quit after a month or three, or very, very quickly. So it's a tricky situation.
Well, yeah, it's not for everyone, but rightfully mentioned, you said like it depends on the period you are entering. It's not probably not for everyone a lifetime job, but if you enter in the right time, you will gain the exposure you needed, and you will serve your duty in such big firms, and then you will move on at some point, or you find yourself fitting in and with the culture, and then you grow there. Yeah, it depends on the person.
It does. It does. That's been incredibly insightful, I have to say. Even for me, after 18 years in the industry, this is really, really useful and insightful. Thank you so much for that. Any last questions or thoughts from you, Rana?
No, I think you've asked all of them, and Maher has answered all of them. Like Tariq said, this was really insightful. I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people that are considering a career in one of the big four.
Any
Sure,
pieces of advice for fresh graduates? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, like a quick piece of advice for fresh graduates.
So personally, for me, when I started, I didn't realize how big of a field this can be and how much, this field can be divided into. And so I set out to kind of become an expert in everything in a couple of years. And so I would put in insane hours. I would be studying a certification, working on my YouTube channel, on my academy, working a full-time job, doing part-time consulting on the side, and so on, just because I wanted to reach a certain level in like a certain timeline, only to find out that when you do put in all that time and effort, you realize that this is a huge field. Not only is there so much to learn, but it's constantly evolving, and trying to do all of that in such a short period of time will have you burn out really quickly. And so my advice personally for fresh graduates is to take your time in learning the fundamentals and try not to skip over that at all, because if you do skip over that, trust me, if it doesn't matter right now, it will matter later on in your career, and then it'll be kind of people will be a little bit less forgiving when it comes to excusing you on not knowing those fundamentals. And so what I recommend is really just focus on the fundamentals. You're going to get there one day, and it's going to take time. So just take your time in learning. Yeah, I think I wish someone had given me that advice. We're all in the same boat. We all have imposter syndrome when it comes to first entering this field, because we see all these people who are professionals in this field, but have been in this field for, let's say, 10 plus years. And we want to be like them from day number one. That really does cause burnout. And some people end up leaving the field for that reason, because you don't want to work, let's say, 16 hours a day, trying to improve yourself to get there from the beginning. And so my recommendation is just take your time, try to understand the fundamentals, get that general knowledge that we spoke about at the beginning of the interview. And then once you have that general knowledge, specialize in a specific area.
That is excellent advice. It personally took me more than a decade really to get to an accepting point where I was like, okay, now I'm gonna accept the fact that there is no way I can be an expert with everything and everything, and I need to accept this and make peace with it. and maybe just focus on 1 or 2 things that I'm going to be specializing in. And even those 2 things or 1 thing that I'm going to specialize in, there is going to be people that probably are a little bit better than me or know a little bit better than me, and that's absolutely fine. And I have to accept this. Yeah, so that's really, really good advice. Thank you for that. Maher, the start of the interview for today, any last pieces of advice that you want to give our fresh graduates?
It takes time to be specialized if you want to be specialized. So as Rana and Tariq mentioned, just take your time. There's a lot of learning curve. Sometimes it's steep learning curve. So take your time in understanding the basics. The basics are crucial. I cannot emphasize this enough. The basics are crucial. Just start from there. Understand what kind of roles are there and tasks are there, jobs are there out there in the field, and what everyone needs, and just start specializing from there. And you don't need to make everything and be the super expert from year 1 or even year 5. We keep learning. I've been in about 20 years in this field, maybe more, and I still take training, still understand to try to understand the new things and try to understand the new technology out there. It's an evolving world that doesn't end.
It's an ongoing process that really truly doesn't end, and this is why a lot of people keep talking about passion in cybersecurity. Whether this passion is gonna remain or it fades away or goes up and down, that's a different topic, but it needs to be there at a certain point in time. This is really, really
and if you have the passion, you wouldn't feel the time anyway.
It's true.
You will just keep learning.
True. But you will feel the budget for the training burning, I guess. But anyway. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, guys, for being with us. I really want to thank Rana as well, who joined us today for this chit chat. For those of you who don't know, Rana runs her own academy. I'm going to add the URL in the description, or I'll just post it on the video as well. So please make sure that you go check it out. Maher is semi-anonymous. I'm going to check with him offline whether he wants to share any of his social media contacts. If he does, I'm going to be adding this to the video as well. Thank you guys for being with us today. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope our fresh graduates benefit from this. I know they will. And hopefully we will catch you again soon in another chit chat.